Speaking of crazy weapons, I was reading about a story where you did a tour with the CIA and they showed you a mechanical dragonfly.
Yeah.
With a battery. What did they show you?
Well, I've had a lot to do with the agency that's been public over the years, and I was giving a talk, and then afterwards, they took me on a tour to a CIA museum. They showed me a lot of things. Oh, here's the helmet that was worn by that pilot who was shot down over Russia named Powers. All kinds of interesting memorabilia. And one of them was a little dragonfly, the size of a dragonfly, and it was mechanical. And I looked at it real closely and thought, wow, that's really fantastic. It's very interesting. And he said, you don't have any questions at all? I said, no, I mean, I get it. And he said, why don't you ask me when it was built? And I said, okay, when was it built? 1967. In 1967, before we had any miniaturized electronics or motorization, the CIA had built that little thing. And it was a little camera that would fly around in here as a dragonfly, and then fly home. And I don't know how many pictures it held, but it's an interesting piece I want to share with you about AI, which is people wonder, how sophisticated is AI and where is it? My belief is that everything we have access to, like AI, we probably have something that the U.S. intelligence had 10 years ago. We're probably dealing with something quite old already.
I'm just looking at a picture of this dragonfly.
Oh, I didn't even know it was public.
That's
the fucker. There he is.
This little thing here.
Yeah.
And, this was made, as you say, 50 years ago. So one can only imagine the type of technology they have now.
Oh, of course.
I mean, they don't even need to fly a dragonfly in because we have all these electronic devices.
Of course. They can turn on our devices, probably your watch if it's an Apple Watch, but certainly your phone. We are participating in, I won't even call it an experiment, but a process that you read 1984, I'm sure, and most of your audience did. I was very heartened during the beginning of COVID that 1984 became the 17th best-selling book in the world in the English language, telling me, people are paying attention. They see that what they're experiencing here has a degree of 1984 to it. I think all science fiction stories come true. I really do. I see it time after time.
What advice would you give to my listeners about how to navigate in the world we're living in today? To avoid risk, threat, whether that's of our soft tissue, as you said, or just with our privacy or lives generally. Like, where does the advice start? You said you raised 10 kids.
Yeah.
What advice are you giving to your 10 kids?
They all know that their dad is a big proponent, and my first book, which is still a very big book, A Gift of Fear, that book is, I think, still the best-selling book in the world on violence after 25 years. And that book is all about intuition and personal responsibility. So the very first thing I would say to your listeners, to you, to remind myself as well, is that human beings did not get the biggest claws or the biggest teeth or the biggest muscles. We got the biggest brains relative to our size. And the nuclear defense system that all human beings have is intuition, much different from logic. Intuition, the root of it, by the way, I learned when I was writing that book, is inter, which means to guard and to protect. So intuition, when you think about it, I just have a feeling I should go back to the apartment and double check such and such. Did I leave the fire on the pot? And you go back and you open the door and you didn't leave the fire on the pot. But something else will always be going on that makes you glad you came back. I believe that intuition is always right in at least two ways. One, it always has your best interest at heart. It's not fucking with you. It's giving you real information that's valuable. And number two, it's always based on something. And so our journey is to figure out, when I have an intuitive feeling like do this show with you, who knows why, but when I have that intuitive feeling, and by the way, I don't do most shows, I don't know what the reason is. I don't know what it'll be. I mean, I can make up one with logic, right? I like that guy. I learned a lot from his shows. I can create a case. I can make a case for anything. But if it's just based on what I feel, and everything you've succeeded at and accomplished was based on what you felt, it was based on intuition. In America, in the West, we think we're doing it by logic, right? I do a big PowerPoint presentation and I say to the board, here's the reason, here's why, and here's the percentages. And they say, oh, good. The board at corporations in America would actually prefer that I use logic, even if I'm wrong. instead of using intuition, even if I'm right. So when I say to you, no, I just think it's the right thing to do. I think it'd be smart. I think it'll really work out, like something like Amazon Prime that people opposed. And then it's like 175 million people just in America are using it. Big success. Intuitive process, not a logic process. Logic is weak and plodding. Logic does A, B, C, D. Intuition does A to Z instantly. And you don't know why. It's knowing without knowing why. I don't feel good about that person. I'm going to back. I said I was going to make this business deal. I'm backing out of it. I said I was going to show up to that thing. I'm calling and canceling. And by the way, canceling, one of my favorite things. I recommend it to everybody. I recommend canceling and postponing to everybody I know. You are not obligated to keep your plans. You made a plan 3 months ago, and you don't know who you'll even be, or if you or them or anybody will even be alive 3 months from now. There's nothing wrong with canceling. Now, I don't do it rudely, by the way, but just to finish on, sort of what your viewers and listeners can do is to really fall in love with intuition and to learn the way you communicate with yourself. There's signals from intuition. Curiosity. You just wonder something. Suspicion. Worry can even be a signal of intuition. But the biggest one is true fear. When you feel true fear, I don't want to do this.
I wanted to ask you a question about this.
Yes.
I met with Magnus Carlsen, who is arguably the best chess player in the world. And I met with him after spending some time in Cape Town writing about gut instinct and intuition, all these kinds of things. And one of the things that I learned through my writing was that in many cases, when someone has a really well-trained intuition, their first thought is the right thought. And actually, if you give them longer to think about the problem, they make a worse decision. So when I met Magnus Carlsen as the number one chess player in the world, backstage, we were both on stage together. I said to him, listen, I've got a question to ask you. Do you basically now just run off intuition, or do you think? And he said, my first thought is nearly always right. So actually, I spend the other time just confirming the first sort of intuition that I had. And actually, I was telling him about a dodgeball game where they got dodgeball players, professional dodgeball players, to look at a frozen image of a dodgeball game and said, where would you throw the ball? And when they gave them little time to decide, they made a better decision. When they just went with their first gut instinct, they made a better decision. They unfroze it, and it was the right throw. If they gave them longer, they made the worst decision. And the sort of caveat, and I guess the question for you is, it appeared to me that you almost have to train the intuition. Like areas in our life where we've got multiple reps and pattern recognition, our intuition is valuable. But then in other areas of our life where we haven't trained the muscle yet, we can make bad decisions. One such example would just be like the first time you start hiring people. You don't have a trained intuition yet. So you go, yeah, she seems nice. But then I've probably been hiring thousands of people for 15 years now. And I get an intuition. So do you have to train your intuition?
Well, I think it happens automatically as you live life that new distinctions are added. But I also believe that it is a natural resource. I could think of it in a spiritual sense. It's very hard to figure out why we feel a certain way. And we do what Magnus said, which is we get our answer and then we backtrack and see if it fits, right? I think the training that's necessary, Stephen, is not the training to improve your intuition, but rather the training to listen to it and to not interrogate it and to not prosecute it. Because I'll give you an example. A woman is working late at night in an office building like this. She's on the 10th floor. She's leaving. She pushes the button for the elevator. The elevator door opens up. Inside the elevator is a man who causes her fear. She doesn't like it for whatever reason. Obviously, she has no opportunity yet to assess all the issues. What's he dressed like? What's he look like? What did I hear 3 weeks ago about a guy who wore a blue cap and T-shirt and bow? She doesn't have any time for that. Her first reaction was like that. What does she do, most women? They get into a steel, soundproof chamber with someone they're afraid of. And there's not another animal in nature that will do it. Now, why does she do it? Because the thought comes, I don't want him to think I'm a racist because he's Hispanic, or I don't want to be that kind of person, or I don't want this reality to be true. So I'm going to act like it's not true, right? And what I say is, let the door close in his face. No problem. If you've got the signal, that's a low-cost decision. Wait for the next elevator. right? That's a very low-cost issue. Now, there are so many examples of this in my work where I interviewed people who had been victimized, and time after time they would tell me, I knew when I walked into that underground parking lot that that was the same car that I'd seen earlier. I knew when I met that guy, such and such. In fact, there's a woman who wrote me the most beautiful thing. I think it's in Gift of Fear, or it's in one of the subsequent books, and she said that she would look at her lifelong diary. She'd kept a lifelong diary, and she looked back at it, and it would say, met this guy, feel a little queasy about him, not so sure, dated him, married him. And then what she wrote to me was, she said, again and again, I could see, there it was in my diary. Listen to this, the ending embedded in the beginning. And so what I encourage people to do, going to your original answer, is how people can be safer, is listen to their intuition, know that its function is to protect you. That's what it's doing.
When I was reading about your work on intuition and your perspective on it, it got me thinking about people in my life that I
have to get rid of tomorrow?
Well, actually that I have, you know that little alarm bell in your head when you have a little alarm bell intuition? Like, I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like something isn't right. And that little alarm bell in my head, I'm like, so what do I do about that? And I think there was one particular example I was thinking of where I was getting this little vibe from someone that something was just off. And then 3 months later, we were at this event and they started opening up about their childhood. And in the course of opening up about their childhood, I learned something about their mother and something their mother used to do to them. And they were talking to someone else about this behavior that it's created in them. It suddenly all made sense. That thing that was making me feel like the vibe was off, I think now is because of something from their childhood that I didn't actually know, which meant they have this behavior, which will make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. And in that moment, and with that, I was thinking about this example before you arrived, because I was like, in that case, my intuition told me something, but I didn't know what it was telling me. I imagine a lot of people have that. They have a vibe of something's not quite right, and they're interpreting it to mean X when it could be Y.
Yes, sometimes there's a very nice, like in my life, and I suspect in yours too, there's often a very straight line between certain childhood experiences and what we ultimately do. In my case, a very easy one is there was fear. I then come to have a deep understanding of fear, both sides of it, and some compassion for it, and some insight, and I then study it. There was violence in my childhood, and so I now it's so long ago that I'm 71, so my childhood is so long ago now that it doesn't have a grip on my throat like it did for a lot of my life, where the narrative was very, very important to me, and the narrative of my childhood was important. Go ahead, you were going to ask a question.
I was going to probably give people the context on your childhood.
Oh, you or me? I'll do it. Okay, good. Yeah, my childhood, damn it. I'll tell you. So yeah, a very difficult time. My mother was a heroin addict. She was quite violent. She was very troubled. She committed suicide when she was 39 years old, and I was 16. And that was a kind of failure for me, because I considered it my job to get us all through this drama alive. She shot my stepfather in front of me. There were a lot in that house that we lived in. I think I saw the house a few months ago, by the way. I think there are 9 bullets in the walls and floor of that house that I can account for, probably still there. And so while I'm describing this to you dispassionately, it's because of 2 things: the distance in terms of time, but most of all because of healing. And I want to give you my definition of healing in this context. My definition of healing for all of us is when we stop using any of our energy to manage the past. And this gives us all of our energy in the present moment. And so what do I mean using energy to manage the past? Well, if I'm keeping that story a-going, and I'm saying to my wife, well, because my mama did this is why I feel such and such, which I went through times in my life when those things were much closer to me. Today, I feel like I'm not using any of my energy to manage the past, the narrative I told you. This whole series of dramas happened, and anytime you hear about a parent or anybody in somebody's life committing suicide, we often think, oh, what a terrible experience that must have been. What you really ought to think when you hear about somebody committing suicide is, oh, what a series of terrible experiences there must have been leading up to that. And I want to tell you real quickly that I had a couple of dreams that my mother was in that were particularly powerful. And I offer this to the audience to know that dream experiences are sometimes all you're going to get, right? Because my mother died when I was 16, so I don't have an opportunity to sit across the table with her and say, what were you thinking when you such and such, and what was going on in your life when such and such? But in a dream, she came to me once and I asked her, why were you so cruel to me? And she was totally perplexed. And she said to me, cruel to you? I was preparing you for this extraordinary life. And I think that's true. I think that's what happened, is that for you, whatever your experience was, for Tony Robbins, who we talked about earlier, what his experience was, it took those experiences. You take away those experiences and you don't have someone who grows up wanting nothing more than to write these books for free and sell them for free and get them published for free, like Forbidden Facts, the current book, in order to help people deal with these issues of skepticism, of fear, etc. You don't get somebody doing what I do, where my ambition is long gone. My ambition for more anything, more money, more houses. Well, houses I might still slip on, but now it's about service to other people. Wasn't always, but it was service to other people. Because I believe that public life, it includes you, if all you do is give me a bad example, that's service. If you give me a good example, that's a prettier form of service. Maybe it's a nicer job you got, but ultimately all of it is service. Everything that we can observe of people in public life and people in our private lives, it's all service. You know, I remember a friend of mine telling me he went back home for Thanksgiving and he saw his whole family. And he said he learned to only stay for one day. He said because all the shit happened on the second day with his family if he stayed for 2 days. And he also learned to stay in a hotel. I said, oh, you staying at home? He said, oh, fun. No, never stay at home. Because here was this group of people. But what he told me that was interesting is he said, Aunt Charlene, you taught me to speak more quietly because you talk so fucking loud. And he says, Uncle Carlo, you taught me to be more gentle because, man, you're rough in everything you do. Throw the glasses around and the way you engage. Dad, you taught me to listen to people because you never fucking listened to a thing I said, even today. Isn't it a beautiful way of looking at it, basically? These were the teachers in our lives. For my mother, 100%, I'm so far past forgiveness and so far into gratitude for the pieces that were wonderful. And by the way, this is a suffering person, right? This is a person that, you know, that charities are for and social welfare is for. You know, a woman with 3 kids and no job and a heroin addict, for God's sake. That's not an easy job. And other drugs too, by the way, which helped me as I grew up to be skeptical of pharma. Because some of the pills she took, one of them called Doradin, has now been taken off the market for causing what? Psychosis, which explains a lot of her craziness. And so all of this you know, teaching that it depends what you do with it. Meaning we all, nobody gets out of here alive, right? Everybody's got a story to tell. And I remember a case where I overvalued my own ability to predict human behavior, which I say in these books, you can predict human behavior. Right? To drive here today in traffic, I had to predict the behavior of thousands of people based on just the little movements of the big metal objects around them. You know, that guy who starts to move over into your lane and then he catches himself and goes, you never trust that guy. You always want to get way behind him or way in front of him. So we're predicting human behavior all the time. But I overvalued mine. I thought, oh, I'm Mr. Genius predicting human behavior because I developed these systems of artificial intuition that predict human behavior. And I was at a meeting and there were a group of people at the meeting and it was going to start in about 5 minutes. And a few people were comforting one woman who was really sobbing at the end of the table. And I thought to myself judgmentally, why'd she even come to the meeting? I mean, if she can't do the meeting, like what's she doing here? And I knew it was a boyfriend issue, right? And that's what she's crying about and they're comforting her. The meeting begins and that woman speaks first and she says through her tears, I'm sorry, you guys, I'll do my best at the meeting, but as many of you know, my husband killed my 12-year-old son 4 days ago. So my little journey into judgmental prediction was about as wrong as you could be. And it was a humbling experience for me because I would have discounted that person in a moment. That's the other side of prediction and intuition, right? You can discount people and quickly toss them away. And so, when you get this intuitive signal, do we have a responsibility to understand it? Yeah, we have a responsibility to understand it. How many people have I met who I thought, what an asshole that guy is. I don't ever want to talk to that guy again. And I didn't. My loss. Sometimes it would have been the greatest person in the world. Sometimes it would have been a great relationship. And now I apply the George Harrison rule, George Harrison of the Beatles, who writes this unbelievable lyric that's in While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which is, I look at you all and see the love there that's sleeping.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.